I knew the evening would go wrong the moment she leaned toward me and whispered, "You're not family, Mary. Not tonight." She said it so coldly, as if she were brushing dust off her sleeve. At 79, I thought I'd grown immune to petty cruelty, but the words still slid under my ribs like a thin blade. I stood there at the edge of the restaurant table, holding the gift I'd wrapped myself, a simple silk scarf I thought my son's wife might like, while she stared at me as if I were a stranger who'd wandered in by mistake. Tom sat beside her, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on his water glass. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look up. I stayed there for a moment longer, long enough to hear the scrape of forks and the polite coughs of the others pretending not to listen. And then I did what I've done far too many times in the last 15 years. I stepped back quietly, nodded as if I understood, and walked away. Outside, the air smelled of rain, the kind that hangs heavy but doesn't know whether to fall. I held my coat tighter around my shoulders. My hands shook a little, not from age, but from the sharp humiliation of being dismissed from a meal I'd helped pay for. I had no one to blame but myself. I'd taught them that I would accept whatever treatment they offered, as long as they called me Mom every now and then. The walk to the bus stop felt longer than usual. The city lights blurred at the edges, and for a second I thought my eyes were failing again. But no, it was just the sting of tears. I wiped them away before they had the satisfaction of falling. At home, my porch light flickered the way it always does in late autumn. The bulb needs tightening, but the ladder is heavy, and my balance isn't what it used to be. I pushed the door open with a sigh and stepped into the quiet house. It smelled faintly of lavender, the scent of the drawer sachets I've used since my husband's days. Frank used to tease me that I was trying to turn the whole place into a garden. He would have told me tonight not to shrink myself just to keep the peace. He had a backbone where I had patience. Maybe that's why we worked. If you enjoy the stories here, dear, you're welcome to join our Patreon. There you'll find exclusive tales that never appear on YouTube, and new stories come out earlier than anywhere else. The link is just below. We're waiting for you. I hung my coat over the back of the chair and sat down at the kitchen table. I didn't turn on the overhead light, just the small lamp near the sink, the one Frank installed 40 years ago. Its glow was warm, steady, undemanding. I stared at my hands. The veins are more visible now, the skin thinner, but they're still steady when they need to be. I thought about the years of helping Tom with school projects, cooking meals when money was tight, taking double shifts so he could go on class trips. I thought about the nights I sat in emergency rooms with him, about the first time he drove a car, about the day he married Liza, and I told myself she just needed time to soften. She never softened. Instead, she grew sharper, more polished, more determined to push me to the margins of their life. Tonight felt like the final push. Not because of the words themselves, I have heard worse, but because Tom let them stand. He let them land on me and didn't even flinch. There's a kind of silence that is louder than shouting, and his silence tonight rang in my ears all the way home. I took the wrapped scarf out of my bag and placed it on the table. It looked silly sitting there, delicate and hopeful. I smoothed the edge of the paper with one finger. At my age, you begin to see the truth of people more clearly. And the truth tonight was simple. They didn't want me there. Not really. Not anymore. I made myself a cup of tea, though I barely tasted it. I watched the steam rise and dissolve. That's how it has felt lately. Slow, quiet, dissolving. Not dramatic, not sudden, just a steady thinning of place, of voice, of importance. But something inside me settled as I sat there. Not breakage, not defeat. Just a calm, firm realization that I might have allowed too much for too long. I finished my tea, washed the cup, and dried it with the same old towel I've had for years. My movements felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. Before going to bed, I looked once more at the scarf on the table. I didn't feel pain anymore, just clarity. There's a point in a woman's life when she stops waiting to be treated well and starts insisting on it. I think tonight was that point for me. I turned off the lamp, let the darkness settle around me, and understood. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. In the days after that dinner, Liza behaved as if nothing had happened, which in some ways was worse. Coldness is easier to confront than sweetness with thorns. She called me one morning, her voice bright, rehearsed, and said she'd taken the liberty of arranging a few things for my own good. That phrase alone made something inside me stiffen. I asked her what she meant, though a part of me already knew the answer. Liza never moved unless it served her. She spoke of safety and support, words she rolled around like candy, but they tasted bitter on her tongue. "Mary," she said, "you shouldn't be living alone in that old house anymore. It's not practical. Tom and I can help handle things, but you need to start thinking about the future. Everyone your age does." I felt the familiar sting behind those words, the quiet suggestion that I was slipping, fading, becoming less capable by the day. At 79, I know exactly what I can and cannot do. My hands may be slower, but my mind is sharp enough to slice through pretense. Still, I listened. It's what I've done most of my life. Listened, absorbed, made space for others. She talked about consolidating paperwork, transferring utilities, combining bank accounts for simplicity, and then she sliced in the things she'd been circling around. "And the house," she added sweetly. "You should consider putting Tom on the deed. Not for us, no, of course not, but for you. It's protection. This way you won't have to worry." I sat down at the kitchen table because the words had weight, and I wanted solid ground beneath me. I heard a car outside, the usual delivery van making its rounds, but all my focus was on Liza's voice, dripping with practiced concern. She didn't ask. She stated, as though the idea had already been agreed upon and she was simply notifying me of the next step. I asked her why this was so urgent now, and she sighed into the receiver like a tired teacher dealing with a slow student. "You've been forgetful lately. You mixed up dates, didn't you?" she said. "That's not like you. We all see it." Funny thing. I'd mixed up nothing. They'd lied about the dinner, and then blamed me for confusion that wasn't mine. That kind of twisting is quiet, but it cuts deep. I let her speak until she ran out of air, then told her I'd think about it. She seemed pleased, as if I'd already agreed. After she hung up, I placed the phone down gently and stared out the window at the maple tree in my yard. The leaves had begun to thin. The branches looked bare in places. Age does that. To trees, to bodies, to relationships. That afternoon, Tom stopped by unannounced. He rarely came without calling first, so I knew it wasn't his idea. He is not a spontaneous man. He moves when pushed. He stood in the doorway with his hands shoved into his coat pockets, looking older than his 45 years, but younger than a man who can stand up to his wife. His eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine, lingering on the smallest things, as if the answer he needed might be hiding behind a chair leg. "Mom," he said, "Liza told me you talked. She's just worried. We both are." That was the first lie. She thinks we should help manage things so you don't feel overwhelmed. The second lie. You know how complicated paperwork can get at your age. The third. He sat at the edge of the sofa, tapping his foot. He kept checking the time, as if he needed to report back. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't correct him. A lifetime of motherhood teaches you when a conversation is real and when it's just a message delivered. This was the latter. He waited for me to say yes. I didn't. I'll handle my own things, I said finally. My voice was calm, steady. He blinked, surprised by the firmness. He wasn't used to it. Not from me. It's just temporary, he insisted. Liza, she thinks. I know exactly what Liza thinks, I said. His shoulders slumped. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who went silent when things got too heavy. But that boy had grown into a man who let someone else decide which parts of his mother were convenient. He didn't stay long after that. When he left, he gave me a thin, strained smile, the kind you give a neighbor rather than a parent. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it. The house felt different suddenly, as if the walls had shifted. There's a certain moment in every woman's life when she realizes people have mistaken her gentleness for weakness. I felt that moment settle on me like a coat I hadn't chosen. I went into the kitchen, made myself tea, and stood by the window watching the early evening darken the sky. It wasn't fear I felt, not quite anger either, just a cool, steady recognition that something was coming, something I hadn't invited and wouldn't welcome. And whatever it was, I knew Liza would be at the center of it, smiling her sugar-sweet smile while she tightened the strings around my life. I may be old, but I am not blind. And I am certainly not done. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a grocery flyer and a utility bill. I almost missed it. The envelope was white, too crisp for anything friendly, and addressed to me in a printed font that looked both polite and indifferent. I opened it at the kitchen counter expecting some routine notice from the city. Instead, I found a neatly folded sheet informing me that an evaluation appointment had been scheduled on my behalf. Cognitive assessment. Functional capacity review. A list of terms that made my stomach tighten. At the bottom, in small type, was the name of the clinic Liza favored. Private, expensive, the kind of place with soft lighting and soothing music, and scheduled without my consent. It didn't say who booked it. It didn't have to. For a minute, I just stood there with the paper held between my fingers, feeling the weight of it settle. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. 79 years of living, and I'd never imagined my own daughter-in-law would try to build a case against my mind. I sat down slowly and read the letter again. Concerns have been raised, it said. Observed forgetfulness, it said. I folded it neatly and placed it beside my tea mug. Forgetfulness. That was the story she was trying to write about me. Not because she believed it, Liza never believed anything she couldn't use, but because it suited her purpose. If she could collect enough notes, enough suggestions, enough professional opinions, she could paint a picture of me as someone who needed support. And the kind of support she meant came with signatures. Access. Control. By noon, I decided I would go. Not for Liza, and not because I needed to, but because I refused to give her the satisfaction of thinking I was afraid. I put on my coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and walked to the bus stop. The wind had a bite to it. The sky looked like it might snow, though it was too early in the season for anything serious. I settled into a seat near the window and watched the houses roll by. The familiar ones with chipped paint and crooked porches. The new ones built too quickly and with no heart. The clinic stood on a corner, all glass and brushed steel, like a place afraid to show age. Inside, the floors gleamed. The receptionist greeted me with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Holloway? We've been expecting you." I nearly laughed. Expecting me, as if I were the one who had gone looking for this. They led me to a small room with gray walls and an upholstered chair. The doctor was a young woman with clear skin and kind eyes, the kind of kindness that comes from training, not life. She introduced herself, asked if I understood why I was here. I told her I'd received the letter. She nodded, too quickly, and began her questions. "Do you remember today's date? Who is the president? Can you count backward from 100 by sevens? Can you recall 3 words after a short delay?" I answered everything calmly. The questions weren't difficult. What surprised me was the sadness I felt rising in my chest, not because the test was insulting, but because someone had decided I needed to be examined like a failing appliance. I thought of Liza at home, probably waiting for the results, her polished nails tapping the arm of her chair. The doctor moved on to practical questions. Can you manage your finances? Do you cook your own meals? Do you ever forget to turn off the stove? No, I replied evenly. But I'm beginning to understand how other people's wishes can make a person seem more fragile than she is. The doctor's pen paused. She looked up at me, studying my face with something like curiosity. "Has someone expressed concern about your ability to live independently?" I considered lying, or softening the truth, but I've spent too many years covering ugliness with politeness. I told her exactly what I needed to tell her. "My daughter-in-law," I said. "She believes I'm in her way." The doctor didn't ask more than she was allowed to, but her eyes softened. "You seem very capable to me, Mrs. Holloway." "I am," I said. After the tests were done, she walked me to the hallway. "We'll send the written report to whoever arranged the appointment," she said. I nodded. Her voice was gentle when she added, "I hope things improve at home." I didn't reply. Home is a complicated word at my age. When I stepped back outside, the air felt colder, sharper. The wind had picked up, tossing leaves across the sidewalk. I tightened my scarf and began the walk to the bus stop. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger comes fast and burns out quickly. What I felt was something heavier, slower, a kind of quiet understanding. Liza hadn't just crossed a line today. She'd stepped fully into territory that would demand a response. And I knew then, as I stood waiting for the bus in the early dusk, that this wasn't about forgetfulness. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't even about me. It was about my house, my independence, my name on every piece of paper she wanted for herself. And though I didn't know the shape of the coming storm, I sensed its first cold wind against my face. I was not going to bow my head and let her rewrite my life. Tom called the next evening, though I could hear in the silence before he spoke that the call wasn't his idea. His voice came through the line soft, almost apologetic, like he was approaching me with hands half raised, afraid I might break. "Mom," he said, "can I stop by for a few minutes? Just to talk." I could have said no. I should have said no. But motherhood is a stubborn habit, and mine stretches farther than it ought to. I told him to come. He arrived with his jacket unzipped and his shoulders hunched, as if the cold evening and whatever Liza had said to him were pressing down equally hard. He walked inside without taking off his shoes, something he never used to do. Small things reveal people more than confessions. He glanced at the living room, at the crocheted blanket over the armchair, at the bowl of lemons I always keep on the counter. His eyes never landed on me for long. "Mom," he began, "about that appointment." "I went," I said. His eyebrows lifted a little, then settled. "Good. Liza was worried you might refuse. She'll be relieved you didn't make things harder." Harder for whom, he didn't say. He didn't need to. He sat at the edge of the sofa like he had the last time, his hands clasped between his knees. I remained standing for a moment, wanting to feel taller than my years. Finally, I sat across from him. "Tom," I said, "I didn't schedule that appointment, and I didn't consent to anyone scheduling it for me." He exhaled loudly, as if releasing a burden he'd been dreading. "It's not a big deal, Mom. It's just a check. People your age should speak plainly," I interrupted. My voice wasn't raised, but something in its steadiness made him pause. He looked at me then, not directly, but near enough that I could see the flicker of discomfort. "Liza thinks the clinic can help us figure out a plan. You live alone. The house is old. It's a lot. I've managed it for decades." "I know," he said quickly, "but things change. And you've been forgetful." There it was again. The word had become their favorite key, the one they believed could unlock whatever door they wanted. I felt a heat rise beneath my ribs, not anger exactly, but the clarity that comes from someone underestimating you too boldly. "What exactly?" I asked. "Have I forgotten?" He blinked, then scrambled. "Well, the dinner. You got the date mixed up." "No," I said. "That's the date you told me. The date you then changed without telling me, and then blamed me for missing." He swallowed. His face reddened slightly, not from shame, but from being caught without an excuse ready. "Mom, you're twisting this." "No," I said simply. "I've spent years untwisting things you and Liza have said. I'm finally looking at them straight." His fingers tightened together. "Liza's trying to help." "She's trying to prepare paperwork," I corrected. "Paperwork that would give her access to my home and my accounts." The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was thick, like fog you have to push your way through. "Mom," he said slowly, "you're imagining the worst." "Am I?" He flinched. That was answer enough. I watched him try to organize a defense, the way he used to build card towers as a boy, carefully, desperately, hoping no breeze would knock them down. But he's not a boy now, and I'm not the woman who smooths the table for him anymore. "Liza thinks it's smart to plan ahead," he finally managed. "She says if something were to happen—" "If something were to happen," I said, "it won't be solved by giving you the deed to my house." His eyes darted away again. He shifted, restless, trapped between his loyalty to convenience and the quiet truth sitting across from him. "Mom, we're just trying to make sure you're taken care of. I've taken care of myself longer than you've been alive." I didn't say it sharply. I said it the way someone states a fact. He rubbed his forehead. "You're being difficult." I almost smiled. Difficult. That was the word people use when a woman stops bending. He stood then, pacing a little. "Liza wants to talk to you herself, maybe tomorrow. She feels like you're resisting for no reason." "Then tell Liza," I said, "that resistance is a reason all its own." He sighed, long, low, heavy. "Mom, don't make this into a battle." A soft, tired breath escaped me. "Tom, The battle began when your wife tried to convince the world I couldn't think for myself." He looked at me then, really looked, and I watched the flicker of guilt cross his face before habit smothered it. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't say goodbye when he left, just walked out into the cold and shut the door behind him. I stayed seated, listening to the quiet house breathe around me. I could feel the shift happening, slow, inevitable, like a tide rising. Liza was no longer hinting. Tom was no longer pretending. They'd chosen their path. And now I would choose mine. 2 days passed before Liza made her move. She arrived at my doorstep in the late afternoon without calling, the way people do when they believe the house is already theirs. Her knock wasn't a knock at all. It was a declaration, sharp, confident, as if she expected the door to swing open by itself. I opened it, and there she stood, wrapped in a coat far too expensive for someone who claimed they were tight on money. Her smile was thin, stretched, a professional mask she wore whenever she needed to disguise unpleasant intentions. "Mary," she said brightly, "we need to talk. May I come in?" It wasn't a question. She pushed past me before I had the chance to answer. She headed straight to the kitchen, where she always felt boldest. Perhaps she liked the symmetry of giving orders in someone else's domain. I followed her slowly, not to show weakness, but because there is a strength in unhurried steps. It reminds people that you don't answer to their pace. She placed her bag on the table, unzipped it, and pulled out a neat stack of papers held with a binder clip. Official looking. Thick. Her expression softened into what she probably thought was sympathy. "I know the last weeks have been overwhelming," she began. "Tom and I talked about it, and we think it's best to settle everything cleanly, for everyone's peace of mind." I didn't say a word. She took my silence as permission to continue. "These," she said, sliding the stack toward me, "are documents prepared by our attorney. Nothing complicated, just updates that reflect where things stand now. Joint ownership, shared responsibility, protection." I looked at the papers without touching them. Somewhere deep inside, behind the calm, something cold tightened like a wire. She kept talking, too quickly, the way people do when they're afraid silence will expose their motives. "It's simply practical. If anything happens to you, God forbid, it prevents a lot of legal trouble. Probate, taxes, decisions you wouldn't want strangers making for you." Her voice grew softer, more syrupy. "Tom doesn't want to upset you, but he's worried. We both are. You're alone in this old house. Things happen. Pipes burst. Heaters break. One wrong fall." I raised a hand, just slightly, and she stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes flashed annoyance. "Liza," I said slowly, "tell me plainly. What do you want?" She paused. For the first time since stepping into my house, her expression faltered, but only for a second. Then she straightened her shoulders. "We want the house in both your names," she said. "Just jointly, so Tom can manage things. Bills, repairs, decisions. You can't keep handling all this alone. It's not safe." "And my finances?" I asked. "Joint access," she replied smoothly. "For emergencies. Only for emergencies." She spoke confidently, but her eyes betrayed her. They gleamed with a hunger I had seen before. The same hunger she carried to every expensive restaurant, every shopping trip, every vacation she insisted they deserved. My house was simply her next destination. I slowly pulled the stack closer. The first page bore the title, "Transfer of Joint Tenancy." Below it, my name, spelled correctly. Tom's name beside it. and a signature line waiting patiently like a trap. "Your attorney prepared this?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "It's all standard." "For whose benefit?" She blinked. "For yours, of course." I almost laughed, but the sound stayed in my chest. I flipped a few pages. There it was, a clause granting Tom the authority to act on my behalf in managing the property, another granting access to my accounts for household expenses. "Did Tom read these?" I asked quietly. "He trusts me with this kind of thing," she replied. And she meant it. That was the part that cut deepest, not her ambition, but his surrender. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward her, not abruptly, calmly, as though returning a borrowed napkin. "No," I said. She stared at me, blinked once, twice. "Mary, you don't understand. This isn't optional. It's what's best." "For whom?" I repeated. Her voice sharpened. "For the family." "I am the family," I said. "This house is mine. My life is mine. My decisions are mine." Color rose in her cheeks. She hadn't expected resistance. Not from me. I'd made myself too small for too long. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "If you don't sign now," she said, "everything becomes harder. Legal processes, court petitions, evaluations. You already had one assessment. If the next one suggests decline—" "That appointment," I said evenly, "showed that I am perfectly capable." Her lips tightened. She gathered her papers, snapping the binder clip with unnecessary force. "Tom won't like this," she warned. "I'm not raising Tom," I replied. "He's 45. She moved toward the door, fury simmering under her polished exterior. At the threshold, she turned back. "You're being unreasonable," she said. "Stubbornness at your age isn't charming. It's dangerous. You're putting everyone at risk." I stepped closer, enough that she had to look directly into my eyes. "The only danger in this house," I said softly, "is someone believing they can take what isn't theirs." Her jaw tightened. She left without another word, her heels striking the walkway like accusations. I closed the door gently. No shaking hands, no trembling breath. Just a clear, ringing awareness that she had escalated things. And now, whether she knew it or not, she'd awakened something in me that had been quiet for far too long. The time for softness was coming to an end. I didn't sleep much that night, not from fear, but from a kind of alertness I hadn't felt in years, as if something inside me had quietly straightened its spine. By morning, I'd made up my mind. Liza wasn't going to stop. She'd laid her cards on the table, papers, clauses, threats wrapped in concern. If I didn't fortify myself now, she'd keep pushing until there was nothing left of my independence but a signature she'd forced out of me. So, I called someone who still remembered the woman I used to be before age made people assume otherwise. Arthur Grant, my husband's old friend and our former attorney. A man who spoke slowly but thought quickly, who never underestimated anyone, not even a grieving widow. I hadn't seen him in years, but he picked up on the second ring. "Mary Holloway," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "What trouble have you managed to avoid this time?" I let out a small breath. "I think I'm running out of avoidance, Arthur." He asked me to come by that afternoon. His office was on the second floor of a narrow brick building, old enough to creak, sturdy enough to trust. Climbing the stairs took me longer than it once did, but I made it without stopping. When I reached his door, he opened it himself, his hair more silver than I remembered, his glasses thicker, but his eyes just as sharp. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. "Tell me everything." And so I did. Not dramatically, not with trembling hands, but plainly. Liza's pressure, the clinic appointment, the papers, the way Tom parroted her concerns without understanding them. Arthur listened without interrupting, except to shake his head when I mentioned the joint tenancy document. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I've seen this before," he said. "Not often, but enough." "Tell me," I said. "Someone decides an older relative is pliable, vulnerable, easy to guide." He narrowed his eyes. "And sometimes that relative is encouraged to sign away the only assets standing between them and dependence." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Arthur, I'm not senile." "Of course you're not," he replied. "That's the point. You're clear-headed, and that makes you dangerous to someone with an agenda. So they try to build a narrative. Evaluations, notes, concerns." He tapped the edge of his desk. "All very tidy, all very manipulative." The word settled in my chest like a stone. Manipulative. I'd always avoided naming what Liza did. Naming it felt disloyal, unkind. But the truth doesn't soften just because you don't look at it. "What do I do?" I asked. Arthur's voice grew gentle but firm. "You protect yourself. Legally. Quietly. Permanently." He slid a folder across the desk. "A trust. Irrevocable. It shields your home and assets from outside hands, including well-intentioned family." He paused. "Or family who pretend to be." I stared at the folder. It seemed too thin to carry the weight of everything it meant. "I'm not sure Tom will understand," I said softly. Arthur leaned forward. "Mary, understanding is not your responsibility. Safety is." I breathed slowly, letting his words settle. He wasn't pushing me. He wasn't rescuing me. He was handing me a choice, one I should have been offered by the people closest to me. "Think about it," he said. "You don't have to decide today." But I already knew. Not fully, not loudly, but somewhere quiet and steady inside me. The decision had taken root. Before I left, he walked me to the door. "You're stronger than they expect," he said. "Don't forget that." Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying leaves down the sidewalk in small spirals. I tightened my coat and began the slow walk to the bus stop. My steps felt different. Not lighter exactly, but more certain, as if the ground had firmed beneath me. Liza thought she was leading me somewhere. She didn't realize I could choose my own direction. Not yet. But she would. Liza didn't wait long before testing the limits again. She arrived on Saturday evening, not with papers this time, but with the kind of brittle cheer that cracks the moment you breathe near it. Tom followed a few steps behind her, shoulders tight, eyes lowered. He looked like a man hauled somewhere he didn't want to be. Liza, meanwhile, swept into my house as if she were inspecting a property she planned to buy, poking her head into rooms, glancing at light fixtures, clicking her tongue softly at imagined flaws. "Mary," she called from the hallway, "we need to have a real conversation, not the evasive back and forth from last time." I stayed seated in the living room. If she wanted a confrontation, she could walk to me. And she did. Heels sharp against the wood floor, expression fixed in that polished, mocking patience she saved for people she believed beneath her. Tom hovered by the doorway, hands in his pockets, too ashamed to leave, but too weak to interfere. Liza crossed her arms. "I spoke with the attorney again. He's concerned about delays. If you keep refusing to sign, we're going to end up in a very complicated legal position." "Complicated for you," I said quietly. Her jaw tightened. "Complicated for everyone. You're acting like we're trying to steal something from you." I looked at her then, really looked, at the confidence that wasn't confidence, at the fear underneath it. People like Liza never chase security for others, only for themselves. "You want my house," I said simply. "You want my assets. You want control." Tom winced, but didn't deny it. Liza gave a short laugh. "That's absurd. We're trying to help you. You're trying to prepare for a future where you get to decide everything," I said. "And the only obstacle is me." If my calm unsettled her, she hid it poorly. Her voice rose just a little, sharp around the edges. "This is why we're worried, Mary. You're reactive, stubborn. You're not thinking clearly. Tom told you. Your memory is slipping." "My memory is fine," I said. "My patience is what's slipping." Tom shifted, looking between us. "Mom, don't make this harder." "She is making it harder," Liza snapped. "Every day she refuses to cooperate. She risks everything, and she risks dragging us into a mess none of us deserve." There it was, the truth peeking through the costume. "You've rehearsed that," I said softly. "Maybe you even believe it." Her face flushed, blotchy and real for the first time. "Believe me, Mary, I am trying to keep this civilized," she said. "But you're pushing me, and there will come a point when I won't be able to protect you anymore." "Protect me from what?" I asked. "From the consequences of your decisions." "And what consequences would those be?" She didn't hesitate this time. She was past caution. "That house is falling apart. You're falling apart. If you won't let Tom manage things voluntarily, then we'll have to involve professionals. Evaluations, assessments, court orders. And once the state steps in—" "Liza," Tom warned weakly. But she was beyond stopping. "You won't have a say anymore," she finished, leaning forward slightly. "And that helps no one." I felt something settle inside me, quiet, unmistakable. Only once before in my life had I felt that same stillness. The morning I stood in a hospital hallway and realized Frank wasn't coming home. Finality can be gentle when you finally stop resisting it. I rose from my chair, slowly, deliberately, and Liza, for the first time, took a half step back. "You've mistaken my silence for weakness," I said. "You've mistaken my age for confusion. You've mistaken my kindness for surrender." I took one step closer. Not enough to threaten, just enough to make her feel my presence. "You will not have my house. You will not have my accounts. You will not have a single signature." Liza's face contorted. Anger, disbelief, something almost like fear. "You're not family," she hissed. "You're just a burden we've been carrying alone." Tom exhaled sharply, but said nothing. "And you," I said quietly, "are exactly who I thought you were." The room went very still. Then Liza swung toward the door, grabbing her coat with jerky movements. "We'll see what the court thinks." She slammed the door behind her. Tom lingered a moment longer, staring at the floor, guilt flickering across his features like a dying light. But when he finally looked at me, there was nothing he could say to bring back what he'd let disappear. He left without a word, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no urge to call after him. It was nearly dark by the time they left. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the silence of my living room, letting the dimness settle around me like a blanket. The house had always held its own quiet, but tonight it felt different. Heavier, almost protective. As if it understood something had shifted inside me. I walked to the front door and locked it, even though no one had ever tried to enter uninvited before. The click of the deadbolt felt like an ending, or a promise. I slipped off my shoes and crossed the room slowly, aware of my breathing, aware of the ache in my knees, but also the steadiness beneath it. Age limits the body, yes, but not the resolve. I went to the kitchen and filled the kettle. My hands weren't trembling. Strange how the moment I finally stopped trying to hold a family together was the same moment I stopped feeling fragile. The steam rose as the water heated, curling into the cold air. I watched it with a kind of detached calm, as if it belonged to another woman's life. But no, that woman was me. She had always been me, just quiet, just accommodating, just tired. I made tea and sat down at the table. The same table where I had once stitched Tom's school costumes, balanced bills, wrote grocery lists with Frank looking over my shoulder. He used to joke I was the spine of the house. "You hold us all up, Mary," he'd say, touching my shoulder lightly. "Don't bend too much, or we'll all fall sideways." I bent anyway, for years, and today I felt the cost of it. The words Liza had thrown at me, "You're not family, you're a burden," still echoed, but they no longer cut the way she intended. They revealed something instead, a truth I'd avoided acknowledging, because I loved my son more than I loved my own peace. They didn't see me as family, not in the way that matters. They saw me as an inconvenience, a structure to be renovated, rearranged, or removed. I sipped my tea and looked out the window. Rain had begun falling, thin and cold. The porch light flickered again, and I made a mental note to tighten it tomorrow. I could climb a small step stool. My hands were steady enough. I was capable enough. I had lived through years of building a life with hardly anything but willpower and careful budgeting. But Liza wanted the world to think otherwise. A gust of wind rattled the window pane. I wrapped my sweater around my shoulders, not out of weakness, but comfort. It struck me then, not as a dramatic revelation but a quiet truth, that Frank would never have allowed anyone to speak to me the way Liza had. He would have stood between us, not raising his voice, just allowing his certainty to fill the room. He had that kind of presence. I had it too. I'd just misplaced it. I set my cup down and pressed my palms flat on the table. That steadiness inside me, the one Arthur had noticed, grew clearer, defined. I wasn't angry. Anger burns too quickly, leaves only ash behind. This was something deeper, a kind of settling, a recognition that the part of my life where I leaned toward them was ending, and the part where I stood on my own was beginning. And maybe, just maybe, that was a kind of freedom. Outside, a car drove past, splashing water onto the pavement. The sound felt far away, as if I were listening to a world that no longer concerned me. I stayed seated a long time, breathing slowly, watching the rain gather at the edge of the window. When I finally rose from the chair, it wasn't because I felt compelled to do anything dramatic. It was because I knew tomorrow wouldn't be like yesterday. Tomorrow, I would go back to Arthur. Tomorrow, I would choose myself, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Tonight, I allowed myself stillness, allowed the quiet to fill the space Liza's voice had occupied earlier, allowed my dignity to return, not loudly, but fully. And as I turned off the kitchen light and walked toward my bedroom, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, my own strength, settling back into my bones. Arthur wasn't surprised to see me walk into his office the next morning. He stood from his chair as if he'd been waiting by the window, watching for me. I suppose he knew that once a woman like me reached a certain point, the decision became inevitable. There are moments in life when hesitation is simply another form of surrender, and I had surrendered enough. He gestured for me to sit. The same leather chair, the same soft creak as I eased into it, the same calm assurance in his eyes. "Mary," he said gently, "have you thought it over?" I didn't answer right away. I reached into my bag, took out the crumpled envelope from the clinic, the one Liza had arranged without my knowledge, and placed it on his desk. He smoothed the paper with deliberate, careful fingers. "That," I said, "was the moment I realized she won't stop." Arthur nodded once. "Then let's not give her space to continue." He pulled out the folder he'd shown me earlier. The trust documents. Thin, but powerful. The kind of thinness that carries more strength than a stack of demands waved in anger. He talked me through each page, not rushing, ensuring I understood every line. And I did. My mind felt clearer than it had in years, quiet, sharp, unwavering. "This will protect your home," he said, tapping the page lightly. "No one, not Liza, not Tom, not the court, can access or transfer it without your direct consent. It's yours. Entirely." A warmth settled in my chest. Not relief. Something sturdier. We moved on. Bank accounts, medical decisions, power of attorney, limited and controlled. Safeguards layered like bricks in a foundation no one could kick in. Arthur explained each detail, but I wasn't really listening to the legalities anymore. Instead, I kept thinking of my kitchen, the rain on the window, the moment of clarity that had washed through me last night. That stillness had hardened into something firm. "Are you ready to sign?" Arthur finally asked. I thought of Tom's lowered eyes, Liza's sharpened smile, the way they spoke about me as though I were an obstacle they were forced to navigate around. I thought of the little boy Tom once was, the one who brought me dandelions from the yard as if they were roses. And I thought of the man he had become, tired, malleable, eager to please the wrong person. "Yes," I said, "I am." He turned the papers toward me. I lifted the pen. My hand didn't shake, not even slightly. Age may slow the body, but purpose steadies it. And I had purpose now, a quiet one, but unshakable. I signed every page. When I finished, Arthur gathered the documents with a satisfied nod. "It's done," he said. "You've taken back control." Control? I rolled the word gently in my mind. It didn't feel harsh or triumphant. It felt like something I should have claimed long ago. Before leaving, I asked him a final question. "What happens when they find out?" Arthur's expression softened. "They'll be angry. They'll push. People like Liza always do. But you're not doing anything wrong. You're protecting yourself. And if they escalate..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Then we'll handle it. Together." Walking back to the bus stop, I felt the cool air settle on my face like a reminder of the world's steadiness. Leaves crunched under my shoes. Cars passed. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Life moved as it always had, indifferent to my private uprisings. But inside me, something had shifted for good. When I reached home, the porch light still flickered. I climbed the small step stool, tightened the bulb with steady fingers, and watched it glow strong again. A small thing, yet somehow symbolic. My house stood quietly, unthreatened now. Safe. Liza believed she knew how this story would unfold. She thought pressure would break me. She thought fear would guide my hand. She knew nothing. And soon, painfully soon for her, she would understand exactly what that meant. They found out sooner than I expected. The letter from Arthur's office reached them on a Thursday, A simple notice, polite and factual, informing them that all matters concerning my property and assets were now secured under a trust. I didn't see their faces when they read it, but I heard the aftermath. Tom called first, then Liza, then Tom again. The phone rang so many times it felt like a warning bell. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom?" Tom said, breathless, as if he had run to the phone. "What did you do?" "I protected myself," I replied. "You blindsided us," he snapped. And for a moment, I heard Liza's tone in his voice, sharp and rehearsed. "This affects all of us." "No," I said calmly. "It affects only me. And that's why I made the decision alone." I could hear him pacing, could almost picture his hand in his hair the way he used to do when he was a boy, caught doing something he knew was wrong. "Liza says this puts us in a terrible position. She says you've cut us out. You tried to put yourselves in a position you hadn't earned," I said. "And now you're where you should have been all along, outside my finances, outside my deed, outside decisions that belong to me." He went quiet, but not with understanding, with frustration. "Mom, you don't realize how this looks. When people see things like trusts, they assume that a woman my age still knows what she's doing?" I asked. "Good." He exhaled sharply. "This isn't you talking. Someone influenced you." "No," I said. "Someone finally listened to me." Before he could respond, Liza's voice rose in the background, urgent, angry, unmistakably aimed at him. He mumbled something I couldn't make out, then came back on the line. "Liza wants to speak with you." "I'm sure she does," I said, and hung up the phone. The silence afterward was almost peaceful, but it didn't last. 10 minutes later, Liza called from her own number. I picked up on the third ring, more out of curiosity than obligation. Her voice came hard and hot, stripped of the sweetness she usually layered over her intentions. "Mary, this is unacceptable. You don't understand what you've done." "I understand perfectly. You've made legal decisions without consulting us, without including family." "I included the only family who acted like family," I said. "Myself." She scoffed, furious. "This will make everything harder. You think a trust will stop us from helping you? From protecting you when things get worse?" "Liza," I said gently, "what you call protection, I call intrusion." A sharp breath. "You're making a mistake, a huge mistake." "No," I said. "The mistake was letting things get this far." I heard her inhale, preparing something cruel, and she delivered it. "If you think the court will side with you once they see the pattern of your behavior—" "Goodbye, Liza," I said, and ended the call before she could finish. I set the phone down and walked to the living room window. Outside, the late afternoon light had softened, settling over the yard like a thin gold blanket. For the first time in months, my home felt purely mine. Not a battleground, not a contested asset, not a prize someone was circling. Mine. I knew they wouldn't stop. People like Liza don't retreat. They escalate. And Tom would follow her lead, too frightened of conflict to see where she was steering him. But as I stood there, watching the quiet street, I felt no dread. They had made their move, and now I had made mine. The envelope arrived on a Monday morning, thin but heavy in meaning. The return address belonged to the county courthouse. I knew before I opened it what it contained. Liza never threatened without follow-through, and she'd all but promised this step the day she stormed out of my house. I slit the top carefully and pulled out the papers. A petition, a hearing date, a claim that I was experiencing cognitive decline and unable to safely manage essential decisions. I read each line slowly, letting the words settle rather than sting. They didn't shock me. They didn't even anger me. If anything, they confirmed what I already knew. Liza had run out of polite tactics. This was force disguised as concern. I placed the papers on the table and made myself a cup of tea. The kettle whistled softly, the same familiar sound it had made for decades. It struck me that the simplest routines outlast even the fiercest storms people create. I sat down, cupped my hands around the warm mug, and breathed. Then the phone rang. Tom. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Mom, he said, voice tight. Don't panic. The petition is just a formality. I see, I replied. Whose formality? He hesitated. Liza thinks it's the cleanest way to resolve things. Once the court sees you need help. I don't need help, I said. I need respect. He exhaled sharply, the sound of a man pulling at a rope he doesn't realize he tied himself. Mom, this isn't personal. It is entirely personal. She's only trying to make sure things don't get out of hand. They already have, I said quietly. There was a long silence on his end. I imagined him standing in their kitchen, Liza pacing nearby, whispering instructions. It was almost funny. The boy who once begged me not to leave him alone at night now listening to someone else tell him what to fear. Please don't fight this, Tom said finally. It'll be easier if you don't contest it. Easier for whom? He didn't answer. That told me everything. I hung up gently, not loudly, not angrily, just firmly. Then I picked up the petition again, reading it line by line. The accusations were predictable: forgetfulness, confusion, emotional volatility. Words chosen to sound factual but hollow under scrutiny. I had seen enough elderly neighbors pushed into corners by similar claims to recognize the pattern, and I knew exactly who to call. Arthur picked up after the second ring. I've been expecting your call, he said. They've filed it, I replied. I figured they would. Paper rustled on his end. We'll respond immediately. And don't worry. This kind of petition requires evidence. They don't have any. I know, I said. But they're counting on noise, not facts. Arthur chuckled softly, though there was steel in the sound. Then we'll give them silence. Silence backed by documentation, clarity, and a judge who has no patience for theatrics. I felt something uncoil inside me, a calmness, deep and steady, the kind that comes not from safety, but preparation. We'll meet tomorrow, Arthur continued. We'll gather your medical records, financial statements, everything that shows you're perfectly capable. I'll handle the filing. All you need to do is show up and speak your truth. Speak my truth. At 79, I'd earned the right to do exactly that. After we hung up, I walked to the bedroom. The afternoon light fell through the curtains in thin lines, dust motes drifting through them like slow snow. I sat on the edge of the bed and folded the petition once, then again, until it fit neatly into my purse. I wasn't afraid. Fear comes when you're unsure of your ground. But my ground felt more solid now than it had in years. Liza had brought this fight to a courtroom, thinking it would weaken me. She had no idea it would do the opposite. The courthouse smelled of old paper and colder intentions. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted a moment to sit in the quiet before everyone else filled the halls with their fears and grievances. Arthur joined me a few minutes later, carrying a slim folder and the calm confidence of a man who had seen too many battles to be rattled by this one. You ready? He asked. I nodded. My coat was folded neatly on my lap, my hands resting on top of it. There was no tremor in them, no hesitation. The only sound between us was the soft hum of the building's heating system and the occasional echo of footsteps down the marble corridor. Then I heard theirs. Liza's voice arrived before she did. Sharp, clipped, the sound of someone performing outrage rather than feeling it. Tom followed her, shoulders hunched, eyes darting toward me and away again, as if looking too long might burn him. He didn't greet me. Liza didn't even acknowledge my presence with a nod. Instead, she whispered quickly to their attorney, a tall man with slicked back hair and the expression of someone accustomed to extracting compliance. I watched them without emotion. At my age, you learn that storms burn themselves out quicker when you don't lend them your wind. Arthur leaned toward me. Remember, he said softly, you don't need to prove anything today except that you're capable and composed. Let them talk themselves into trouble. A clerk called our case. We filed into the small hearing room, fluorescent lights, a long table, the judge's bench looming above. The air was colder in there, or maybe that was simply the effect of stepping into a space where the truth finally had formal weight. Liza sat across from me, her posture straight, her expression arranged into a portrait of concern. She looked at the judge with wide eyes whenever she spoke, as if she were the only one in the room brave enough to care about my well-being. Her attorney opened with a statement full of polished phrases, patterns of confusion, declining executive function, risk of self-neglect. Words chosen to sound clinical, factual. I listened without blinking. When he mentioned the worrying incident of the forgotten dinner date, I saw Liza's eyes flick toward me, waiting for me to squirm. I didn't. When it was her turn, she clasped her hands dramatically. "Your Honor," she said, "we're not trying to take anything away from Mary. We're trying to keep her safe. She's been overwhelmed. She's made erratic decisions. She's shutting us out." It was almost impressive, the performance. Almost. Tom spoke next, his voice soft, strained. "Mom doesn't seem like herself lately. She's distant, forgetful. She's avoiding us, which isn't normal." I wanted to ask him when exactly he'd decided to notice anything about me, but I kept my expression serene. Then the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "do you wish to respond?" Arthur placed a gentle hand on my arm, just for a moment, a grounding gesture. Nothing more. I rose slowly. My knees protested, but they still held me. I looked directly at the judge, not at Liza, not at Tom. When I spoke, my voice was even, unhurried, clear. "Your Honor," I began, "I am 79, but age has not removed my judgment. I manage my home. I manage my finances. I make my own meals. I remember my appointments, including the one my daughter-in-law scheduled without my consent." A flicker crossed the judge's face. "I have medical reports, bank statements, and evaluations showing I handle all tasks independently." I glanced at Liza then, briefly, letting the truth settle where it needed to. What I do not have is a family willing to accept that independence. The room became very quiet. I continued. "I am not confused. I am not impaired. I am simply no longer willing to relinquish control of my life to people who believe they know better than I do." Then I sat down. The judge nodded slowly, making a note. Arthur's eyes smiled, though his face remained professional. Across the table, Liza's composure cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. She hadn't expected grace. She had expected fear. But fear was something I no longer carried. The judge called for a brief recess before testimony continued. Liza pretended to shuffle papers, but her fingers moved too quickly, too nervously. Tom kept his eyes fixed on the table as if looking at me would force him to acknowledge what he'd helped create. I didn't watch them. I didn't need to. Their shifting told me enough. When we were called back in, the judge adjusted his glasses and spoke with the calm authority of someone who had no patience for theatrics. We will now review the evidence submitted. Arthur rose and handed the judge a neatly organized packet. Bank statements showing regular payments and no unusual activity. Medical evaluations showing stable cognition. Utility bills. Tax filings, correspondence, all in my handwriting, all orderly. These documents, Arthur said, reflect a woman fully capable of managing her affairs. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He simply presented the truth. And truth, when spoken plainly, carries its own weight. Liza's attorney countered with a handful of statements, vague observations, second-hand notes, and the clinic appointment she'd arranged. There have been concerning behaviors, he insisted. Instances of confusion. The judge flipped through the thin stack with visible skepticism. Do you have medical evidence? Professional assessment? Any documentation supporting these concerns? Liza opened her mouth, but her attorney stepped in. We're in the process of gathering. In process, the judge repeated. Meaning you filed this petition without evidence. The words landed heavily. Liza's lips tightened. Tom stared at his hands. Then came the part I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Holloway, the judge said, I'd like to ask a few questions directly. I stood again, steadying myself with a hand on the table. He asked about my daily routines, how I managed my finances, whether I cooked, cleaned, drove. I answered plainly, without embellishment. Then he asked the question that cut through every page of the petition. Do you understand the nature and consequences of the trust you established? Yes, I said. I placed my home and assets in legal protection so that no one can misuse them, including people who believe they're entitled to them. His gaze flicked briefly toward Liza. Did anyone pressure you to create this trust? No. I acted of my own will because I recognized the pressure coming from elsewhere. That phrase hung in the air like a quiet bell, not loud, but impossible to ignore. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you. Please be seated. Liza's attorney rose again, clearly rattled, and attempted to salvage their claim. Your Honor, even if Mrs. Holloway presents well today, cognitive decline can fluctuate. We must consider long-term safety. The judge held up a hand. This is not a guardianship court for hypotheticals. It requires evidence. And so far, I see none. Liza leaned forward abruptly, her voice cracking as she tried to intervene. She's lying. She's been confused for months. Mrs. Caldwell, the judge interrupted sharply, you will speak only when recognized. The flush on her face deepened, blotchy with indignation. Tom finally looked up at me. His eyes were tired, tired of choosing, tired of being steered, tired of pretending he didn't feel the wrongness of all this. For a moment I saw the boy he once was. Then Liza shot him a look that pinned him back into silence. Arthur stood once more. Your Honor, we ask that the petition be dismissed with prejudice due to lack of evidence and clear demonstration of capacity. The judge tapped his pen against the desk, thinking. The sound echoed lightly in the small room. Finally, he spoke. I will issue my ruling shortly. He rose from the bench, signaling the end of testimony. As he walked toward his chambers, I let my breath settle. Not in relief, but in recognition. This wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was simply truth allowed to stand unbent. Behind me, Liza hissed something at Tom, her voice sharp enough to cut. His shoulders sagged, as if her words were weights rather than winds. Arthur leaned close, his voice low. "You did perfectly." I nodded, keeping my gaze forward. The storm hadn't passed, not yet, but the sky had begun to break in my favor. And even if they didn't realize it yet, the tide of the whole battle had turned. The judge returned sooner than expected. We all rose as he entered. Arthur calm beside me, Liza rigid with tension, Tom looking as if he might implode from the strain of holding himself upright. The judge settled at the bench, adjusted his glasses, and spoke with the measured certainty of a man who had already made up his mind. "I have reviewed the petition," he began, "as well as the testimony, and submitted documentation." The room went silent. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum more softly. "Mrs. Holloway has demonstrated a clear understanding of her affairs," he continued. "Her financial and medical records show consistent, capable management. The petitioners have not supplied evidence to the contrary." Arthur remained perfectly still, but I felt the quiet satisfaction radiate from him. Across the room, Liza's face tightened into something brittle. "Therefore," the judge said, voice firming, "the petition for guardianship is dismissed." He paused, letting the words land where they needed to. Then, "dismissed with prejudice." Liza inhaled sharply, as if struck. Tom blinked hard, absorbing the meaning. There would be no refiling, no second attempt to wrest control through the same methods. But the judge wasn't finished. "There is one more matter," he said. "The court is obligated to address the misuse of legal proceedings. Filing petitions without evidence, particularly for the purpose of obtaining access to another person's assets, is a serious concern." Liza stiffened. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably. The judge continued, "I am issuing a formal warning. Any further attempts to challenge Mrs. Holloway's independence without substantial evidence will be considered an abuse of process." The silence that followed was thicker than anything earlier. It pressed into the room like a slow-moving tide. Liza's jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. Tom's eyes fell to the floor again, shame settling over him like a second skin. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. Victory, when you're my age, isn't loud. It's the quiet confirmation that you were never the one who needed correcting. The judge rose. "Mrs. Holloway, you are free to go." Free. Imagine that. Being freed from a battle you never asked for. Arthur touched my elbow gently as we stepped toward the door. "You handled yourself with dignity," he murmured. "I handled myself," I said. And that alone felt significant. In the hallway, the air felt warmer, softer. I breathed it in slowly while Liza stormed out behind us, heels striking the floor like thrown stones. She rushed ahead, dragging Tom by the arm. He glanced back once, just once. But the look was not an apology. It was recognition of what he'd allowed, of what he'd lost. They disappeared through the courthouse doors, swallowed by the bright afternoon light. Arthur and I walked more slowly. My steps were steady, my spine straightened by something more powerful than pride, by the return of my own voice. Outside, the sky was open and clear. I pulled my coat tighter and looked toward the bus stop. The world felt unchanged, yet something inside me had been quietly reborn, not triumphant, not vindictive, just whole. This wasn't the end of the story, not really, but it was the end of the part where I had to prove myself to people who never intended to understand me. From here on, I would walk in my own direction, unhurried, unbent, and finally, unafraid. The walk home from the courthouse felt different than I expected. I thought I might feel lighter, but it wasn't lightness. It was something steadier, like a weight finally shifting into the place it belonged. The air was cool, the kind that wakes you without startling you. I breathed it in slowly as I made my way down the familiar streets, each step unhurried. At my age, you learn not to rush victory. It meets you in its own time. When I reached my house, I paused at the gate. The paint was peeling a little, and one of the hinges squeaked, but it was mine, entirely, legally, permanently. No one could circle it like a vulture anymore, pretending concern while measuring where the furniture might go. I opened the gate and stepped inside, feeling the small crunch of gravel under my shoes, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times before, but never appreciated quite like this. The porch light, which I had tightened myself just days earlier, glowed warmly. I placed my hand on the railing, rough wood, familiar, honest, and climbed the steps. My knees complained, as they always do at the end of a long day, but they carried me without trembling. Strength doesn't vanish with age. It just changes shape. Inside, the house greeted me the only way it knew how, with its usual quiet. The tick of the old clock, the faint smell of lavender from the sachets in the drawers. I slipped off my coat and hung it neatly. No one rushed me. No one questioned me. No one hovered with a pen and a stack of papers disguised as care. That kind of peace fills a room in a way noise never can. I went to the kitchen and set the kettle on the stove. As it warmed, I glanced at the photo of Frank pinned to the corner of the fridge. He stood there in the picture with his easy smile, one hand on his hip, the other buried in the pocket of his work pants. He had always believed I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. I wondered what he would say now. Probably something simple like, "About time, Mary." He had a way of saying truths without dressing them up. When the kettle whistled, I poured myself a cup of tea and settled at the table. Outside, the branches of the maple swayed slightly in the breeze. For once, I didn't think about what Liza might be plotting next. Not because she had given up, women like her rarely do, but because it no longer mattered. Some doors you close not with an argument, but with a signature and a steady heart. And after that, they stay closed. I thought of Tom for a moment. His lowered eyes, the weight he carried but never examined. I didn't feel anger toward him anymore. Disappointment, yes. Distance, certainly. But not anger. People choose their comforts, and some choose the ones that cost them the most. He may come back someday. He may not. The ache of that uncertainty is real, but it doesn't own me. I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle into my chest. The house felt peaceful. Not lonely, peaceful. There's a difference. Loneliness is when you wait for someone who won't come. Peace is when you stop waiting. The sun dipped lower, coloring the kitchen floor with soft amber. I watched the light move slowly across the tiles, the way I used to watch Frank reading in his chair, the way I watched Tom playing on the carpet as a boy. Life leaves traces in a home, but it also leaves room for new breaths, new truths. I touched the edge of the table. Solid. Familiar. Mine. For years, I told myself that keeping the family together meant staying quiet. Bending. Making room for everyone else's storms. But dignity isn't loud, and it isn't a fight. It's the quiet refusal to disappear in your own life. And today, in that courtroom, I didn't disappear. I stood. Not against them, no. I stood for myself. As the last of the daylight faded, I felt something warm settle inside me. Not triumph, not revenge. Just the steady confirmation that I had reclaimed the one thing I thought age had taken from me: choice. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes for a moment, and let the stillness wash over me. It felt like reclaiming my name. And if my story means anything to you, if it settles somewhere in your chest the way truths sometimes do, then don't wait for someone else to defend your worth. Do it yourself. Quietly. Firmly. When the moment calls for it. You deserve that kind of peace.